Why did Hitler lose the Second World War? The short answer after years of research and putting the pieces of the puzzle together is because he could never have won it by design. In World War I, the Entente, the Anglo-French and the Russians attacked the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary along with the Ottoman Empire. The question is why? Because the Central Powers had made an agreement with the Ottoman Empire for Middle Eastern oil, which at that time the Ottoman Empire extended all the way down to the rich oil fields of Iraq, which meant that the Germans were getting their hands on huge quantities of oil. Germany at that time was expanding like crazy, just like China is today. Imagine the following scene. The Germans signing an agreement for the so-called Berlin-Baghdad railway from Constantinople to Baghdad, and ultimately a Hamburg to Basra railway, that would allow the industrially advanced Germans access to the still untapped Mesopotamian oil. This 99-year agreement also gave mineral rights, up to 20 kilometers on either side of the railway. The Western powers went crazy. Another piece of the puzzle is the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 1919, that prohibited any industrial development in Germany along with excessive reparations. They had cut off East and West. The treaty stripped Germany of 65,000 square kilometers of territory and around 7 million people, including the Great Territories, the Rhineland, the Ruhr, and so on. And they forbade all industrial activity, not just the production of weapons, because in order to make weapons, you must first have industrial activities. You can't build a single cannon, an armored vehicle, ammunition if you don't have other industries to support it, along with raw materials such as aluminum, nickel, steel, and of course oil. The Western powers had forbidden, in other words, industrial production in Germany. That's what in effect the Treaty of Versailles did, and of course as a consequence, famine struck Germany. And early on, Adolf Hitler realized that only if he somehow annulled the Treaty of Versailles would Germany be saved from famine and destruction. As soon as Hitler came to power in 1933, he practically abolished the Treaty of Versailles and began the industrial reconstruction of Germany, and of course, industry would inevitably end up producing armored vehicles, airplanes, ammunition, and so on. Thus, Germany raised its head, economically speaking. With public works and autobahns everywhere, Germany became a factory, a huge construction site. Keynesian policy was implemented before Keynes. Of course, Mussolini had first implemented it, with fascism in Italy. And so there was a great economic boom. And one fine morning, in 1936, Hitler has Germany ready. And what is the proof? The best Olympics of all time, the Berlin Olympics in 1936. The English elite see this, and also see that Germany is now a great country, but it is not self-sufficient in energy nor resources, because Germany has no oil, no nickel, no manganese. In general, it has no raw materials to further grow and support the ambitions of a great power. After the First World War, following Ottoman defeat in 1918, the Ottoman Empire was carved up into smaller pieces and partitioned to spheres of influence, with the French and the British getting the lion's share in the Middle East. We all remember Lawrence of Arabia, roaming the Middle East and the deserts of Arabia, which by coincidence were full of oil. The Germans already knew that the oil of Romania and Hungary are only enough for a trivial defensive war, but no more than that. Neither the Romanian nor the Hungarian oil can support an ambitious great power. Since these rich oil fields were taken and under the control of the West, which other country has oil at that time, and lots of it, and if Germany takes it over, it will become a self-sufficient superpower. This country is Russia and the Caucasus region, with the world's first industrially drilled oil well in mid-1850s being in Baku. and that was Hitler's dream from the First World War. He had written about it in his book. He had spelled it out. Towards the east we will find living space, or Lebensraum as he called it. The pieces of the puzzle start to fit together, bit by bit. And now the dilemma comes to England. Shall I let the tiger grow to manhood? Can I ride the tiger? And if I am able to ride the tiger, will I be able to dismount afterwards? I rode the tiger okay, but I cannot dismount afterwards because it's so ferocious. It will eat me. Well, these are basic truths, since the ancient Greek orator Demosthenes said similar things since antiquity as well. And of course Churchill and the British elite read these things, and he reads Cicero as well. And the English elite is now thinking, it will benefit us if Hitler attacked the Bolsheviks and destroyed Bolshevism. But, on the other hand, the Germans will become a superpower, with access to vast amounts of Russian oil. Or the other alternative. Do we deal with him before he even becomes a superpower? If you were an Englishman, what would you do? Would you let him destroy communism and then become a superpower himself and having access to unlimited resources, or would you deal with him before he does that? The pieces of the puzzle start to fit together, bit by bit. Here is the whole story. Many Englishmen disagreed. The Earl of Halifax and the deposed King Edward, who married Simpson and left the throne, were in favor of this. Let him go east, clean up the Bolsheviks. We the English and the Germans, we are but one race. But there was another view which eventually prevailed, and which Churchill of course expressed. And what did the other view say? The preaching of communism is internationalist and concerns only the working class. But the movement of Nazism, of National Socialism, is not limited to one class. It is not only for the workers. It concerns all classes. And this can become a flag of anti-colonial struggle, with severe repercussions to the very foundations of the British Empire. Hitler takes notice of this, and to give the English a signal to view him in a friendly manner, he tells them, I am not making any internationalist movement, nor am I speaking against your colonies. You keep your colonies and let me take oil from Russia to become a superpower in Europe. But the majority of the English elite accepts the other point of view. The point of view that says, no, we will not let the tiger grow strong. We are not in danger from any communism, not even from Russia. We are in danger from Germany. So what are we going to do? Are we going to let Germany grow strong, to strike Russia, to take the oil and become a superpower? The answer is no. What are we going to do? And the English elite thought in a cunning way. In a war between England and Germany in Europe, the empire might lose, but if we drag Hitler into a world war, he will lose. And a world war means a two-front struggle. We will suddenly hit him before he can attack Russia. Then the Germans will have to attack Russia for the oil, and in the meantime, we will have already worn the Germans out. And if we enter the war, America will be lured to be part of the war on our side, one way or the other. And in such a world war, Germany will become a plot of land. We will break them up once and for all. And so Churchill and the English elite dragged Hitler into a world war. How did they do that? They gave him everything on a plate. Take Austria, take the Czech Republic, and at the end they say to him, take a slice of Poland, we won't complain. And there they give him two lines. One line said, don't you dare touch Poland, which is in debt to the English banks, and another from Henderson said, okay, go to Poland, no one will complain. And when the English see that Hitler is hesitant to invade Poland, they send a delegation to Moscow in July for an Anglo-French-Russian pact against Germany. After this, Hitler was compelled to counter and make a move by signing the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, in August 1939 that divided Poland. Thus begins the war with the Allies, but nevertheless, he is slow to attack the West because he is not yet ready. He intended to wage war against Russia and avoid a two-front East-West struggle. But when? He calculated a decade from 1935 to make airplanes, to build armored vehicles, to manufacture new weapons. He intended to make jets. He was aiming to make atomic bombs, a new type of submarine, the so-called Mark. And despite all this, Hitler managed a lightning war in France, which he himself planned. He had the tanks pass through the Ardennes forest. Manstein had thought of it too, who was a military genius, but the final decision was Hitler's. This, along with some other things that we will talk about shortly, shows that Hitler was a military genius. Well, not exactly genius, but he had the brains to conduct military campaigns, and this was first seen in France, which its defense collapsed swiftly. And despite all this, he sends peace proposals to the English, through the Vatican, through Stockholm, by many routes. He offers everything to the English. He even offers Poland again. And just to interject here, now you might be able to connect the dots and figure out for yourselves, why did Hitler let the opportunity pass by and strike a deadly blow to the Allies in Dunkirk? Because he didn't want war with the West. His goal was the resources of the East. And Adolf understood that he was being dragged elsewhere. Again, to interject, now you might connect the dots and figure out for yourselves why did Rudolf Hess traveled alone by plane and landed in Scotland. Of course, Hitler had said with a dose of paranoia, if the American Jews push me into a world war, I will kill all the Jews of Europe. There will not be a Jew left in Europe. That was his madness, his paranoia. He thought that the Jews ruled the world, and he didn't understand that Churchill wasn't a Jew, because Churchill and the English elite were the ones who sent him to war, not the American Jews. Hitler was influenced by the First World War, where he said that the German Jews laid down their weapons at the behest of the Jews from America and waged an internal war against the German people by undermining the war effort. According to Hitler, the Jews were to blame for the defeat in the First World War. It was a matter of obsession for him. Anyway, the attack on Russia begins. Before it began, he had calculated to attack in May in order to avoid the autumn rains and the winter snow. And then comes Mussolini, his ally, that complicated things by invading Greece from the north, through Albania, in October 1940. We don't know yet. Did he act as an agent of the English? Was it a strategical move proposed by his generals, or simply out of madness? Because at that time, Hitler was talking to Franco of Spain. And Mussolini understands that Hitler has promised Franco the French fleet and the French colonies. So Mussolini might have thought, Hitler is selling me out. I'll attack Greece. Since July 1940, he's been preparing to attack Greece. We know this from embassies, archives, and testimonies. In August 1940, the Greek cruiser Elli was torpedoed by an Italian submarine. It didn't all come suddenly in October. But any attack Mussolini made on Greece, whether victorious or not, would necessarily bring the British from Egypt to Crete, and so the oil fields of Romania would be in danger, and of course, create an unstable situation in the south flank of Hitler. To counter this, Hitler would be forced to move forces from the Russian front and shift focus to Greece. It is impossible that Mussolini or his generals did not understand this. It is also hard to believe that he acted emotionally, as Galeazzo Ciano says. My suspicion is that Mussolini acted in agreement with the British. We can see today that Mussolini's attack on Greece spoiled Hitler's plan of an early attack against the Soviets. And my suspicion becomes stronger because, When Mussolini was captured by the guerrillas in northern Italy, he was executed immediately, very quickly. Suspiciously quickly. And one would expect to get Mussolini to court and look at his files and personal archive. Let's see what kind of communication he had with Churchill and the British, because indeed, he had communication before 1940. And today we know, since the First World War, that he was working for the British. As a suspicious historian, I suspect that what happened in Greece was not a simple reaction by Mussolini, because he was irritated with Hitler talking to Franco. Remember this, he had sent Canaris to Franco without having realized that Canaris was working for the British, that is, for the anti-Hitler conspiracy of the generals. Today we know everything, and Hitler himself found out about it shortly before he died. Imagine Hitler's position. He had the British, Americans, and French in the West, the Russians in the East, his own generals fighting against him. He told them one thing, and they did another. On top of that, his ally Mussolini, opening another front in Greece that necessitated the intervention of German troops to stabilize the situation, since the Greeks were winning the Italians. Also, Hitler's counterintelligence was feeding him false information. It is worth mentioning at this point that a secret recording in Finland in June 1942 between Hitler and Mannerheim shows the Germans vastly underestimating the amount of weapons the Soviets had. This was a direct failure of German counterintelligence. The recording can be found on YouTube. I have a suspicion that Heydrich was on to something concerning the counterintelligence, and this was the reason why on 3 October 1941, the Czechoslovak military intelligence in London, and I stress the word London, had made the decision to kill Heydrich. It all makes sense now. This is how the front in the East was broken, in the offensive of 1943. The forces were withdrawn from the North, and the same happened later in Normandy. The generals betrayed him, and today we know that most of them belong to the so-called anti-Hitler opposition of the generals. They were not paid agents of the English, but actively collaborated with the British side. Gunther von Kluge, the commander of the Western Front, shortly before the second offensive in the Ardennes in 1944, drank cyanide and died. Hitler ordered 3 autopsies to find out the truth. Some said he died of pneumonia, others of cardiac arrest. The 3rd autopsy revealed the real cause, cyanide. Gunther von Kluge, one of the great generals of the Third Reich, had gone to the Allies to surrender. And Rommel, he was also involved. The entire staff had sold out to the British. Adolf was fighting with his own generals. Counterintelligence was also sold out, already eroded from the top, starting from Canaris. And who did Hitler send to Franco to negotiate? Canaris, the same guy that did everything in his power to keep Spain out of the war. And while all this is happening, Mussolini attacks Greece, thus giving the British the opportunity to enter Greek territory, and thus delaying Hitler's offensive against Russia. And Adolf is fighting in Crete in May, while the campaign in Russia should have already begun. Instead, it starts at the end of June, and by October, the fields in Russia are already covered in snow. In Russia, Hitler had ordered that there should be no direct attack on Moscow, nor should they enter the major cities. The plan was to go behind Moscow with 2 armies, Army North and Army South. His goal was to encircle Moscow from the rear. That was what interested him, and of course, the oil. That was what Adolf wanted. And when the snow falls, the German generals shout, "Let's all retreat, let's retreat." And Hitler tells them, "Sit there." It was Hitler's first big fight with his staff. They were demanding a retreat. "It's snowing, we have no clothes, we have no equipment." It was a sudden, early and severe winter, and it caught them off guard. And the generals said, "We are 30 kilometers from Moscow, let's go back." And Hitler answered them, "Back where? Where will you set up defenses? Where will you put the heavy weapons? Where will the units go?" There was snow everywhere. There was no back. And he said, "Stay where you are, because retreat means dissolution. You will suffer what Napoleon suffered." And because he imposed this by force, history has shown that Germany was saved from collapse. October, November, December, in front of Moscow, they were held there because Hitler pressured the staff and forced them to stay. He dismissed them all, he expelled them. And he said, "From now on, I command the troops stay where you are." And so he saved Germany. Because otherwise, Germany would have been destroyed in 41, in front of the gates of Moscow from that terrible retreat that the defeated generals had thought of. They were all against him. All of them. Let's go to the second great betrayal. Well, no, at Stalingrad there was no time for betrayal. There they didn't have time. What happened was that all the generals went and surrendered to the Russians. And inside Russia, a whole headquarter was set up called Free Germany. They even published a newspaper. They worked as a propaganda outfit, as a traitorous link. They sent messages to their former classmates, to the German generals. "Get rid of the madmen and come with us." And from this formation, the so-called Free Germany of the traitors, the Germans who went with the Bolsheviks, East Germany was later created. That's where it started. And Hitler had to fight them too. Now let us turn to the West. That's where the big trap was set. They were planning and anticipating where the Allies would land. And what did Hitler say? They'll strike in Normandy, not in Calais. And Canaris, the Englishman right from the start, jumps in and says, "But they have 50 divisions there. 100. Patton is in London. The landing will take place in Calais." Canaris was feeding Hitler false information, inflated numbers and false divisions. And Adolf was doubting himself. Do you think he's right? Despite all this, Hitler himself had a clear opinion. The main attack will take place in Normandy. And then the fatal thing happened. The entire staff sold him out. His orders were not being carried out. They left him alone. And of course, on July 20, he saw this firsthand, the attempted assassination. And what did Adolf say? "Isn't there an honest man with a gun to kill me?" They are afraid. They are planting bombs from below. But the German people were with Hitler. The people supported him, so did the troops who believed in Hitler. Only the staff, the generals, had their own opposition. And of course, let's not forget, the Allies were behind them. This is the deeper meaning of the famous scene of Hitler shouting at his generals in the 2004 movie Downfall. Hitler starts shouting when the generals tell him that Steiner does not have enough forces to make a counterattack, directly disobeying Hitler's orders. Now you know what is hiding behind the curtain and what Hitler was against. Now you can understand why Hitler could not win the war by design. Could Hitler win the war? Let's entertain that thought and say under what conditions. Well, a two-front fight. Could he win a two-front fight? Let's see, from the moment the British declared war on him, and from the moment the attack on Russia was decided, which was delayed thanks to the Battle of Crete in Greece that Mussolini dragged Hitler into, and winter indeed fell hard in October and November. Could he win a two-front fight? And from the moment America also entered the war, was there a chance that Hitler would win? Who the hell says that? But let's discuss this scenario too. What could have happened? Yes, if the jets, the bombers, the Messerschmitt 262s had been built early that Hitler ordered. But they built fighters. What should I do with the fighters? Hitler tells them. I want bombers to stop landings to destroy Normandy, the landing, the invasion. Yes, if he had been able to, and had built an atomic bomb, which was sabotaged by Heisenberg himself. Heisenberg himself said this: "We were on the verge of building it and we stopped it." It was not the sabotage by the English in Norway, with heavy water. Those are just fairy tales. No. Heisenberg himself wrote this. "We could," he said, "but we didn't want to go, we hated him. The Nazi and the anti-democrat. They stopped and sabotaged the development of the atom bomb from within. If he had made an atomic bomb, if he had it in his hands, if he had loaded it on the Messerschmitt 262, remember, the jet bombers, not the fighters. If they had given him what he wanted, probably yes, he could have won the war. And with the submarines, the new ones, the Marks, which could have changed the game. And that's why he stayed in Berlin till the end. He didn't leave. He committed suicide there, when the Russians were already there, a block away. He waited, even then, to the last minute. Maybe at the last minute they would tell him, the bombers are ready. We have the atomic bomb. The only way to save the game. That's why he rejected all peace proposals. In Germany's most difficult moments, the proposals rained down from the West and from Stalin. Stalin constantly sent him peace proposals. He told him, "I don't bomb Germany, I don't drop incendiary bombs. I don't set fires, because I want to find a city, I want to find a country." But the Western powers, they threw phosphorus incendiary bombs. They burned everything so that nothing would be left. A good example of this was the bombing of Dresden. So that was Hitler's reasoning, and that is why he always refused all peace proposals. From Ribbentrop from Stockholm, from Count Bernadotte from the Vatican. It wasn't just one, there were many peace proposals, and he refused them all. David Irving has written all about this in his well-researched books. And then Hitler would say, "We'll make peace. As soon as I have the atomic bomb loaded on my bombers, then I'll be in a position of strength to dictate my terms and make a peace proposal. But now, with you both bothering me, what peace should I make?" And that's why he stayed in Berlin until the last moment, waiting to hear the news that the super weapon was ready, the so-called Wunderwaffe. We know all this since all the records have been released. But I believe that even if Hitler had succeeded in making the atomic bomb, he might not have succeeded in winning the war. Perhaps if he had managed to build the atomic bomb in March of '45, as he expected, and if they had also brought him the bomber jets, then perhaps a jet could have dropped the atomic bomb on London. So how could he win the World War? If you think about it, there was a whole plan hatched in London to drag him into a world war in the first place, because it was absolutely impossible for Germany to manage both the West and the East at the same time. Simply impossible. Not to mention the tricks that the Allies played to see it through to the end. One of the many tricks was the conference in Casablanca in early 1943, where Roosevelt made the announcement of unconditional surrender. That is, the decision not to accept any negotiations and to continue the war until the complete destruction of the enemy. This essentially meant fight to the end. Furthermore, there was the second announcement in Quebec in 1944, where Morgenthau, the Jew, said that Germany must become an agricultural country, revealing plans for the complete weakening and restructuring of Germany after the war. It will never become an industrial country again. This plan meant that half of the Germans would starve to death. Goebbels took this and made it his banner. His strategy was total war to the end. The game was rigged. You see now why I said in the first place Hitler could never have won the war by design. You see now why. Hitler was dragged into a world war precisely because he was going to lose. Because if he had waged war only in Europe, limited to the English, he had a good chance of winning. And it was impossible for Hitler to win the world war, impossible even if he had managed to build an atomic bomb. I will end with this. What I say is not intended to glorify Hitler. He was a madman who killed a lot of people, and this is indisputable. Nor am I going to whitewash the Nazi regime. My purpose is to show the other side of the equation. What interests me is the truth behind the Second World War. Without knowing this truth, it is impossible to understand what is happening in the world today and impossible to perceive what may happen tomorrow. We read history not to understand the past, but to understand the future. The past shows the future, that is how it is.